All right, welcome back, listeners and viewers, to the Totum Living Room. Excited for episode number 3 of the podcast. Hope you've enjoyed the first 2. I'm pretty excited personally about this one because the topics today are near and dear to my heart, and I think the bottle of bourbon that we selected is a fantastic pun on the situation that we're going to talk about today. So welcome to Michael and to Paige, and let's dig right in with the current event of the days that we are in the middle of right now.
Yeah.
Crazy days.
If you had told me 6 months ago that I would have suggested we record a return to work podcast, I would have puked all over it. But here we are. It's exciting news. It's no longer speculation. Well, maybe. I'm sure for some companies it is, but at the time of recording this, Reed Smith has just announced their return to office date will be 3/1. So right around the time that everyone is listening, all 26 of you are listening or watching this, Reed Smith will be back to work.
And that's relevant because they're the largest law firm in the city of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, like 620 some employees, I believe.
Yeah, 270 actual attorneys.
Yes, so the largest law firm in Pittsburgh. Other law firms, larger firms, have already announced they're going to be following suit or that they have a similar plan for back to work, which is great because twofold for us, really. We've been downtown most of this time. Kevin, you've always been bullish on being downtown, being in the office, having a presence amongst the inventory here. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be great to see more people on the streets. Hopefully we can get some more restaurants down here opened up. But yeah, talk more about the implications of what this means outside of worse traffic.
Yeah, I'm ready for the traffic. It's been wild. I live 14 miles from the city, and I can get downtown in 14 minutes, which I yearn for the day of it being a true 30 or 40-minute commute because a strong downtown makes a strong region. I think right now, as of March 1st, there's only about 36% of the pre-COVID workforce actually in downtown office buildings right now, and that is no way for a city to operate or to run efficiently or economically, candidly. What's really interesting, though, on the same backdrop is visitor trips to downtown are back to like 85% of pre-COVID levels.
It's because there's no traffic.
Well, maybe. But isn't that interesting that the workforce is only back at 36%, but the visitor population is back at 80%?
You mean like leisure, not like tourism,
Not tourism,
right?
yeah. Leisure like Market Square.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The amazing part is that it is just shy of 2 years that they closed up. So they have not been back in full force for the better part of 2 years. We came back downtown in August of 2020, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, so we've been down here for 17 months longer than that. And it'd be great because now you're going to have a lot more people down here. And I think that the other service amenities, the restaurants, the shops, they will start to come back because the people are here.
Yeah, and so to that point, I was going to go down probably a rabbit hole about like the leisure being back already, but the workforce not coming back to the office because, we have talked about that. Like, are people really don't feel safe going back to the office, or have people realized that it's a better quality of life to have the balance because people are still taking trips and going out to restaurants? And what's the difference between that or going to the office?
Right. It really doesn't make any sense. I even noticed in some of the announcements about the return to work policies are still like so archaic, if you ask me, because those same employees have no problem going to PPG Paints Arena for a hockey game. Mm-hmm. They don't have any issues going to the Benedum for a show, but yet going to the office is a scary thing. It's from an administrative perspective, it's fascinating.
Which,
I think the hybrid thing, that's here to stay. If COVID has given us one gift here that will be long-lasting, is that hybrid workforce. People do enjoy staying home and working from home, but they do want to be back in the office too. So
Don't you think from a management perspective, though, that's going to be so difficult? Like, I think the theory of the hybrid work is great. But when you're employing 600 people in Reed Smith's case, or 10,000 people in PNC's case, how do you manage that workforce on a flexible schedule without serious like HR labor conversations happening?
Ineffectively.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
I can't see how it will actually occur that there are future downstream consequences that you're going to face from that.
Right.
I think it's going to be like a split board. I mean, I think that there are employees who thrive at home and want to be at home and want that flexibility and don't care about their company culture. And I think that there are going to be firms and organizations in every sector that will be 100% virtual. But I think more competitive, not even more competitive in industries, but I think in other firms and organizations, there will be a highlight on the experience and the culture of the company. And I think that'll almost become a recruitment tool to some extent, where some companies in tech will continue to recruit on the flexibility and, the work from home optionality. I think other companies will become like like the Google, like we have this campus, we have all of these things here for you. I think once people get back into the swing, into the routine of going to the office, I think we're going to see like an incredible resurgence of like the amenity war, because I think companies will start to paint their space as a place that employees want to come in order to foster that company culture that makes them a more attractive option for recruitment.
And I think companies that actually had an existing culture prior to the pandemic are probably going to modify it. There'll be changes that occur just simply because this is what people are getting used to now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everyone's had to have that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you come full circle to how that impacts downtown, I mean, we have a plethora of Class B minus C buildings that were built 50, 60, 70 years ago that just are not competitive in the landscape today to bring employees back to the city. So I think it's going to be a fascinating kind of rebirth of downtown over the next 10 years, because I do think the return to work thing's real and it will be here. But, sitting in a 8-foot clear ceiling, no windowed office, I think those days
are gone.
are
Yeah.
definitely going to be gone.
Yeah.
So
It's going to be very interesting to see what the next year and a half brings as people do start to repopulate downtown.
Yep.
And the new businesses that will come here, too.
It's going to be interesting to see what the next 20 minutes brings in this podcast, but can't wait. So as far as leasing activity, let's talk a little bit about how we feel the market has been impacted, or most recently with companies coming back or companies deciding, and I don't want to talk about it a ton because we're all burnt out on those discussions from during COVID, but in the last 3 to 6 months, what has the activity level been like in regards to office leasing in the downtown area?
yeah, I mean, I think it's still really, really quiet. I think the leases that have happened have been leases that are either renewals of existing term or really just hunkering down for a little while longer with short-term extensions, et cetera. You still have not seen any major downtown office announcements. There's been a few in the fringe areas and in the suburbs, but
A lot of movement too.
Yeah, a lot of movement.
Some big tenants going from downtown to perimeter locations.
but velocity itself is still way down, and I still think it's an incredible buyer's market or tenant's market. UPMC is subleasing space at US Steel Tower that they're advertising it at $15 a square foot. So, I mean, if you ever wanted to be downtown and talk about an amenity-rich building, it has everything you could ever dream of, and the space is gorgeous, but they can't even give it away. So I think velocity is still an issue that the city's going to have to overcome.
And probably when people do go back and start to recommit, they're going to be on smaller spaces. Perhaps less people populating those spaces, but the spaces themselves will be consolidated.
Do you think it presents opportunities to bring more smaller firms downtown? Do you think we'll see an increase in smaller footprint users who maybe pre-COVID wouldn't have been able to afford real estate downtown? Or do you think it's completely situational.
I think it's situational.
Yeah, I think from the perspective, it's not space that's driving the repopulation of downtown, it's access to employees. Everyone has to be competitive and they want the best employees possible. And they're kind of in the catbird seat now dictating, well, I want to work from home during this time and I want to be downtown and I want it to be this. And that's what the employee base will be saying. And I think
The competition thing for the employees is wild. I mean, we're working on that project right now where the client has seen 3 departures with the person leaving doubling or tripling their pay. Not changing jobs, just changing companies and doubling or tripling pay. I mean, the competitive landscape for really good talent in Pittsburgh right now is something to behold for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that will affect space use and how they populate it, but I don't think we have enough information to say it's going to go this way or that way.
Right.
Okay. So you don't think leasing volume is up drastically over what it was 9 to 12 months ago?
No, I think it's still.
Yeah, I
Really?
think it's pretty much the same place.
Yeah.
There is activity going on, but most of it is, I don't think, a better way of describing it, I don't think there's any net absorption. In fact, I think that we're losing more space than anything.
Yeah, and from a percentage basis, Paige, you're probably right. Like percentage-wise, if there was 1 tour 9 months ago and now there's 2, that's a 100% increase in activity, but it's still non-existent activity.
Right. So let's talk about the timing of all of this. Probably coincidental,
Right.
but let's talk about what happens around the time of year, March, for people who are leasing space in any facility.
Well, right now,
And Michael is hot to trot on
to
this
trot.
topic.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't received them yet, you're going to receive them shortly, is your operating expense breakdowns from last year and the budgets coming forward.
And what for anyone listening who does not know just give a little 1-minute crash course on operating expenses.
Well,
1 minute on the most complicated thing in real estate. Go. You're on the clock.
on the clock. And so when you lease space, let's just take downtown by way of example. When you lease space here, you're either going to craft your lease under a full service scenario that's either going to have an expense stop or.
Well, pause there. What's full service mean?
Okay.
Wait,
For the
pause
people.
before all of this. When you lease space, you have base rent, which is the dollar square footage number,
That most people talk about.
That most
I pay
people talk about.
$20 a square foot.
which is like just the top layer. And then when you peel back the layers or dig deeper, the lease structure that you agree to will also include not outside, above and beyond that, well, not always, but in
Right.
addition to that base rent figure, or sometimes baked in partially or fully into that base rent figure, you will have operating expenses. So every landlord, every different lease structure can pass those through in a different manner.
Right?
So there's base rent, there's
Let's
tax,
start-
there can be taxes, there can be insurance, and then there can be every other expense involved
from
with
the
owning
bottom
the building
up.
or operating the building.
So the rent that's just the rent on the space is called the triple net rent. Okay, that's the rent that the landlord provides absolutely nothing. Typically in a retail space
Or an industrial space.
or an industrial space, I have this box of space that I'm going to lease and everything else that's required to operate it. The common area costs, removing the snow, doing the landscape, paying the taxes, paying the utilities, cleaning everything, emptying the garbage.
Advertising, marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff would be added on top of it. Okay, so that's triple net. Then you can break down the various nets. Now, this is where it begins to get confusing and only gets worse as you go further up the chain.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not like one language. It's almost like dialects, depending on what market in, depending on when you learn the business, depending on if you're an office specialist or an industrial specialist.
Absolutely.
Like, people throw around these words, but it is
And-
dialect specific for sure.
I don't want to totally expose myself, but like 2 years in the business, and I still will go to Kevin from time to time or Michael for clarification. So we had like a a whole Kevin Riley whiteboard session on this recently where we broke it all down so that I could visualize. But there aren't specific lanes for all of these things. Like everyone can do it a little differently.
Yes, and everyone does do it differently. And like Kevin said, markets will do it differently. But basically, one of the nets is the cost to operate or to maintain the building. Who removes the snow? Who picks up the garbage? Who
Fixes the roof
Who
leak.
fixes the roof leak?
Who lights
does
the
this?
parking lot?
Who lights the parking lot? And then there's another component that one of the nets is your utilities, whether that gas, water, sewer, trash. And then another net would be your insurance.
And taxes.
And taxes. So you have these breakdowns there. So the question is, who provides the services, who is responsible for the services, and who ultimately pays for the services, what are included and what aren't.
What's billed directly to the tenant, what the landlord pays and then gets reimbursed by to the tenant if there's a markup on any of those services.
Yeah, and I think that's
All
a really key thing to reiterate is it's who provides the service, who's responsible for the service being provided, and who pays for it. Like, it's 3 different buckets.
3 absolutely different buckets. And then
And I'd venture to guess that 90+% of the tenants out there have no idea what their lease says.
It's funny too. I mean, I always
I
think
think
about.
They just get the bill.
yeah,
I always
actually
think about it when we got-
they're on 90%.
Right.
There is a landlord in town that every year sends very nice Christmas gifts, and that is most likely a pass-through to their tenant. So they're
absolutely is
sending
a
out
pass-through to the
probably
tenant.
500 beautiful gift sets, probably $50+ a piece, and that is a line item that they are passing through to the tenants of their building.
When that wonderful landlord takes you to the Pens game or the Steelers game or the Pirates game, that's an operational expense pass-through.
Yeah, and
Somebody
what's the
is
Michael
paying for it.
Castle line?
I can give you $1 and take it away 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's goes back to, again, the structures. And
And that's not to say landlords are bad or
today's program is brought to you by the good folks at Larceny.
Which, guys, I don't know if anyone else knew this, but larceny means theft,
yes.
which
Yes.
Yes. And we are obviously playing on it a little bit, but landlords at the end of the day are in business to make money. And I think it's just important that the tenant understands that and then understands how they make their money.
And one of the problems, and we've talked about this before, the cocktail party conversation. So someone says, oh, I just signed a lease and I got a full service rate for $24. And then you're kind of sitting back wanting to ask the next question saying, well, what is the operating expense? Did you get a base year or did you get an expense stop? And it's completely deer in the headlights moment for them because they absolutely know that's an entire section of the lease. They have no clue. They have no clue of what the landlord can charge them. They have no clue about all the costs that are associated with that. And getting back into this real estate true-ups and expense cost pass-throughs, this is where the landlord hands you that bill and said, oh, well, we thought it was only going to be $6 a foot, but in actuality, it's $8.50 a foot. So in a sense, that base rent that you thought that you were paying, which was, let's just say $20, is now $22.50 because he handed you another bill. And this is a bill that's going to go ongoing throughout your lease. It's a price that you're going to pay throughout the term of your lease.
Yeah, so let's talk in like numbers real quick.
and I just wanted to go back full circle because I think I cut him off in asking to explain what OPEXs were, or OPEX was. But basically, at the beginning of every year, once a landlord gets all of their books settled, we'll call it, for the year prior, the tenants will have a right, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure there are a million different ways this can break down too, but the tenant has a right to audit those expenses to ensure that their pro rata share of those expenses that they are being charged is correct. But then at the same time, they also get projected expenses for the following year, correct?
Kind of,
The
sort of.
upcoming year, or
Yeah.
the
Yes.
upcoming year.
Depending if they negotiated those rights to audit and what degree those rights to audit were in their original lease agreement.
Sure.
that they can audit it with some teeth.
Yeah,
Right.
so rights to audit and ability to audit almost are unaffected by the fact that this is the time of year, whether you have the right to audit or not, that you're going to find out, is there a new bill coming and what is that bill?
Right.
And whether you have the right to look into it or not, or the right to do anything about it, there's plenty of leases that
And if
say,
you
sure,
do
you
it-
can audit, but
And if you do it,
Right.
I mean, how many people have that in their lease, don't know they have that in their lease, and are so busy with their day-to-day operations of their business, the last thing they want to do is comb through and audit, landlord
right.
expenses.
And I think COVID happened and everybody audited their lease for a concept called force majeure. We'll talk about it on another program, but
Program.
podcast
Grandpa.
program. Oh, Jesus, stop with the grandpa jokes. But in this particular case, it's auditing of that expense line, not necessarily the force majeure. And we've got some wild examples of things we've seen, but it's just funny that everybody's coming back to the office this time. And I bet last year they didn't pay attention to these bills at all, but this year maybe they're going to pay attention to it a little closer because a lot's changed.
Even just janitorial. Like, think of the more stringent, wide-spanning janitorial that a lot of landlords brought in just to try to make people feel safe to come back to their buildings.
You're
Who's paying for
it.
that?
Right.
Well,
So
you are.
And then there's the situation where in some leases, landlords will attempt, their standard lease, because why wouldn't they, will attempt to have the tenants in place also assume the pro rata share of any vacancies in the building.
Yeah, we need to very clearly go through this one because this one's fascinating.
Yeah, let's just go back to the COVID protocol concept. When everyone has been out of the office, there have been changes that have been made to the building, okay? Whether it's additional cleaning, whether it's additional products, putting those little stands 6 feet away from the other
HIPAA
guy's
filter
sticker,
things,
HEPA filters,
filters on.
modifications.
MERV 13 filters.
Yeah, modifications to your HVAC system to accommodate that.
The antibacterial door handles that still everyone touches, but they swear we can't get germs from it.
If someone claims that they have COVID and now you're forced to completely disinfect your office, there are a lot of costs that will be incurred there. And the landlord is not going to incur any of them because most likely he has a clause in his lease that says, I have the right to pass through this cost to you. So if your cleaning costs, which typically can be anywhere from $1.25 a foot to $1.75 a foot, I would almost guarantee you're going to see those costs go up to $3 a foot. And that's before we get to any modification they made to the HVAC system or any other staffing protocol that they've had to put in place. So that should be the very first thing someone's going to look at it. And whether they were talking about entering into a building on an expense stop basis or a base year basis, and a quick discussion of that is, if you leased a space for, let's just say $24.50 a foot, and your expense stop was $4.50 a foot, that language means the landlord's obligation to provide these services stops at $4.50. Under a base year scenario, under the same structure, if you lease the space at $24 a foot, and then in the first year of occupancy, the cost of your occupancy, the cost of operating the building was, let's just say, $6.50, the landlord's obligation stops at $6.50. So that goes right into the base rent that you had alluded to before. That's what you would have been paying. Now, most new buildings, when they deliver, they're given estimates. This is what I think it's going to cost, because typically in a brand new building, you wouldn't have incurred all of your costs in the first year. So a base year doesn't make sense to use, so you would use an estimate-based expense stop. But if a building has an operating history, you would most likely want to have the base year expenditure.
So right now, though, if I was looking to lease space right now, and so let's call it March of 2022,
Sure.
and a landlord wanted to give me a 2020 base year,
That'd be a no-no.
That would be a no-no.
That would be larceny.
and
That would
And-
absolutely be larceny.
And let's explain why.
Because
I mean, Michael explained how base year works, but with a specific example.
Sure. So if you were leasing space in 2022 and the base year that your lease had in it was 2020, that would mean that whatever it cost to operate the building in 2020, let's call it $10 a square foot.
Which pre-COVID, before we knew the implications of the, better cleaning, better filtration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Now in 22, if it costs $13 a square foot to operate that same building, day one of your lease, based on that structure, your lease is whatever you agreed to in rent plus $3 a square foot. Whereas if you had a 2022 base year, then day one of your lease would be for the rent that you had agreed to, and you would only be responsible in 2023 for increases that happened in 2023 over 2022. So long as you also didn't agree to a situation which we had hinted at, which was if the vacancy of the building goes from 100% to 50%. I'm sorry. Yeah, the occupancy of the building goes from 100% to 50% during this same window of time. Some leases and landlords have written it in such a way it doesn't cost less to run the building, right? Whether there's
most costs, there's fixed costs.
Yeah, there's
that don't
fixed costs that
decrease.
don't go away. Taxes, insurance, the roof, the HVAC systems, those don't change. So in that same example, where in 2022, it costs $13 a square foot to run that building. If your lease is structured in such a way where the landlord can pass through all expenses of the building, both your pro rata share and your pro rata share of any vacant space, meaning the fixed cost expenses, you can see major swings in your expense year pass-throughs, even though you thought you signed a full service lease. It was full service for 1 year. And in every subsequent year, you're on the hook for that. And we actually have a client whose operating expense pass-throughs were more than their base rent in 2021 because the vacancy of the building caused a fixed expense that got passed through to them on a pro rata basis, and it was a devastating bill to get.
They signed an extension and didn't adjust their base year when they signed the extension. So whatever they were given, there was an automatic, and I think at that time,
It was a 2007 base year.
2007 base year, and there was, if they were signing the extension at $22 a foot, they were already paying $28 a foot. And that was pre-COVID numbers.
And at a fully occupied building in 2020, when the world changed, not fully occupied and a little bit more expensive to run the building. So,
Yeah. So this is the landlord's, the argument is it's the landlord's transfer of risk. Once you occupy
and their
the
ability
building-
to keep their rate of return the same.
Absolutely. And when the other part is, what is he charging you for? Okay, what is he allowed to charge you for?
Or she.
Or she. Okay, keep this,
Or they, or we,
Or they,
whatever.
All
we,
right.
Yeah,
That
us.
was.
or,
Edit that.
oh, come
landlord.
on, the landlord.
The landlord, they.
The landlord entity. What are they allowed to charge you for? And this is where it can get really haywire.
And it's so different from market to market. Right now, in the Pittsburgh market, you're typically able to negotiate a cap, meaning that even if the increases go up, that you are only exposed to maybe a 3 or 4% increase. It's almost like an inflationary hedge for you, the tenant. But as you guys know, we're working on a project in Dallas right now. Exact same situation in terms of how this all works. But the cap in Dallas that you can negotiate is 10% right now. So think about that. 2 different markets, exact same structures. But Dallas is so concerned with rising pricing that their landlords are only agreeing to a 10% cap. I mean, we haven't seen increases in operating expenses go up by 10% in one calendar year in my whole career. Have you?
Well, we haven't gotten those breakdowns this year because I do think that there's going to be an impact from COVID.
Right.
This would be
10%?
this would be the time it would
Yeah.
hit though.
And inflation and labor shortage.
Well, we haven't even hit the labor shortage and inflation
That's
part
what
yet.
Dallas is really worried about.
Because it really has a year to a year and a half catch-up period. But now that COVID's hit, because now you're putting all this, these new services and these new pieces of equipment into play, this would be the beginning of the time that you can recover them.
Right.
And it can be an astronomical amount of money.
Yeah. And it's, again, like 2 years in the industry with two very great mentors, and it's still something that I have trouble understanding or like really getting. So it's like,
not that you don't understand it. I think it's that it's so
it's different
nuanced,
every time.
and it's different every single time.
Nuanced is the perfect way to describe it, and that's why it's wild to me when I hear of a tenant signing a lease without representation, without real estate representation. Because even your lawyer, some lawyers, I'm sure will pick up on that nuance.
Yeah, if they're real estate lawyers, they'll pick up on it. But if they're
But some people who are executing,
even great real estate lawyers do not understand how to operate a building.
Right.
Or the cost
and
that
a
you're
lot of times
going
before the lawyers get involved, you've already agreed to certain terms in an LOI, so it's
Right.
too late.
They are an
So-
after-the-fact solution.
That's the PSA here. Please, God, don't. If you are the person looking for space, if you're the tenant, the tenant in this case,
yeah,
understand that when you go to the landlord, they're not bad people, but they are looking out for their interests here. And if you aren't represented by a real estate professional, no one is looking out for your interests, and no one will be attuned to the specificity of how the operating expenses are passed through year to year. That's a huge exposure.
I'm going to jump off a sidetrack here. The lease that you signed today is with a landlord. That might not be the landlord you deal with tomorrow. So in this particular case, with the exponential increase in operating expenses that we were talking about previously, that property traded. It got sold to a different landlord, an extremely professional landlord. And by the word professional, I mean the
Good with numbers.
Really good
understands
with
operating
the rules.
business. So when he bought the building, he bought it at a much higher cost than it was assessed at.
So your
Bang,
taxes double.
automatic tax increase that you're going to pay for. Okay.
the fitness facility that's an amenity that's free to the tenants typically is an expense that the landlord puts in the operating expense bucket, not just to run the gym, but what people fail to realize is if the gym is the whole first floor of the building, guess what? The building's paying rent to the landlord for the gym, and all the tenants are sharing in the rent of that gym.
In some of these cases, you'll see it in every lease, the landlord has the right to change and modify space. Well, that actually means he has the right to remeasure the building and change the common component and change your proportionate share. So it very well could be the case, he takes the property out of the actual structure of the building, so you're paying rent on that, and he's increased your common area share because there's less space that he's getting revenue on.
What do you mean by that takes it outside of the building?
Well, if he
Like
takes it out as an amenity, let's
Like
say
it's
the
no
building.
longer in the
Let's say
building.
the building was 200,000 feet, and he took 10,000 feet out.
Out of inventory
Now
to
he's
make it a-
dividing your space over 190,000 feet.
So your
But
percentage went
charging
up.
you for what he took.
Yep.
Oh,
Your percentage
Gotta
went
love
up.
it.
I've seen the same thing happen with management offices that are within the building, and just charging for those things, but removing them from the space. This, like I said, a landlord can give you $1 and he can take it back 7 times.
I think the real PSA is try to sign a gross lease that's fixed and can't change.
well, good luck. Good luck.
But
luck.
and certainly you want these services. In fact, you pay for these services. You're more than willing to pay for them, but you just don't want to get hosed on them. And
Right. And you gotta know what you're signing.
Absolutely. Knowing how you're going to be charged for something and knowing what he's going to charge and justifying it and then asking for the right to look back and say, this is not right, I want this removed.
And there's usually a very short window, which is full circle back to, it's interesting that companies are moving back at this time of year, because typically, even if you're savvy enough to negotiate the right to audit, it's in a very, very narrow window of time, maybe 30 days. If you're
Maybe
really
30
good,
days.
maybe 60 days, but it's a really, really narrow window, and if you miss it, that right's gone.
Oh, and they can be extremely restrictive, that you can only audit them, our books here in this space with this thin window of
It's like when the government
with this-
releases files, but 98% of it's redacted.
Yes, it gets to be an extremely tedious.
And then what
effort.
happens? I mean, what happens after an audit? So you audit their books, and then what?
Well, it really would depend on what your lease says. Sometimes that you can say, I will only adjust this audit if you find a 5% discrepancy. Well,
So
it's
even
gonna
with
be-
then, they still have, well, I'm good.
Okay.
They still have a 5%.
Well,
Okay.
if that's the number, it could be a higher number than that, it could be a lower number than that.
Yeah, because they don't want to get in a fight over pennies. Like
Yeah.
5%, they're like, that's
Yeah.
within a rounding error, so we don't want to fight about it.
Yeah,
Even though 5% could be a big,
5% could be a huge number.
Especially if you fight to cap it at 3, if you fight to cap your expense at 3% increase.
well, I
Well,
think
like
if
you
you're a
can-
3,000 square foot tenant, then a 5% cap or a 5% kind of like, rounding error is okay. But if you're a 500,000 square foot tenant, a 5% rounding error could be substantial. And in that case, you wouldn't agree to it because you'd have some more leverage.
In this one particular case that we've referred to, when they signed the base year in 2006, the operating expenses for the building were $2 million. When they got their 2017 pass-through, was $3.7 million to operate the building. And that wasn't a tax increase. That was outside
crazy.
of the,
Oh, man.
so it's something that everyone should pay serious attention to.
And I feel like we didn't even get into like at the beginning, we talked about full service, gross, triple net. Like we could spend an entire thing just describing
For
those
sure.
things. But I think the simple way to describe it is that those are just words. And what really matters is the definition of those words in the document.
And the interpretation of those words. Most buildings are measured with a modified BOMA,
Whole nother topic.
whole number topic. But just using the word modified, it's modified.
Right.
There's the standard, and we
It's like,
modified
I
it.
did this and I took some liberties. A little bit of this, and
Yeah.
a little bit of this.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and some people do it different than others. And so what is the best thing to eliminate your risk? Is the triple net scenario better? Is the full service scenario better?
Yeah, and Kevin's whiteboard map the other day when this came up was very helpful. And I was telling Kevin, I do feel like we should create a little graphic, and maybe like when I'm making a very unflattering face, just put it in the video
So people can
as an
pause
overlay.
it and see it.
Because it is, I mean, it's helpful to know, even though like nothing is cut and dry and there are anomalies, even if someone says it's a modified gross lease, what does that really mean? But I do think we should provide our listeners with a little cheat sheet. But I also just think if you are a tenant, if you're looking for space and are considering signing a lease at any point in time, having a real estate professional that is looking out for your interests and not representing your landlord is vital to
Getting someone who
mitigating
knows-
the risk.
Getting someone who knows what they're talking about. And I would hate to say this, but I think there's a lot of people.
He's going to say it
He's
anyway.
gonna say it.
I don't
I'm
know
going to say
where
it.
this
I'm
is
going to say it anyways.
He's on his
But
second
no,
glass of bourbon. He's definitely
No,
saying it.
there are a lot of people that really don't understand the true nuances of this. And I think if you're going to negotiate on one side of the table, you should really understand what it's like on the other side of the table. These are things that landlords do because they can, because they've negotiated. It's a profit center.
And that's go back to what we talked about on the last episode of, being what some people would call a generalist, but, having experience on both sides of the transaction, you understand that. You understand fully the landlord's motivations and the things that the landlord can and will attempt to do in a lease, like what is favorable to the landlord. And then when you're representing the tenant, you're all the more prepared to look out for those things, and to mitigate the risks of those things.
Yeah, and I mean, Michael said it before, the cocktail party real estate.
Cocktail party.
It is definitely my Achilles heel when I hear about people talking about their real estate at cocktail parties and what they're paying, because they really don't truly understand the total cost of occupancy. And if I had a nickel for every time I've told someone, whether you were hiring me or Paige or Michael or Tommy down the street or Bob, whatever, hire somebody to help you walk through this jungle of opportunity for the landlord to make money. Because that's
And when
what
you're
they're there to do. They're
considering
trying to make
hiring
money.
someone, ask them these questions, and they make sure they have
Well,
the answers.
it's interesting because in the cocktail party, if you ask the very first question, you know that they don't know the answer. And it just, you want to stop it right there, or in those cases, that's when my wife kicks me. But
That's
they
when I
just,
go deeper.
yeah, they just simply do not know, and you realize that, oh my Lord, this is you're tied to the tracks now, and here comes the train, because this is something you live with. This is we can't discuss this in a half an hour podcast. This is something that we've learned over a period of X number of years, and it's a significant thing, and it is not going away. If you don't pay attention to this when you negotiate the lease, you will live with it for whatever that term of the lease is.
And if you're considering signing an extension, also that. Look at the original lease. Don't just sign an addendum to your lease extending your term, because you're still agreeing to all of the things in the original lease. So like if you
Right.
have the 2007 base year and you don't update the base year when you renew,
If you're talking to someone about renewing your lease, the very, very first thing you should say is, I want a new base year
To next year's date.
to next year's date.
Amen to that.
Absolutely.
so there's your
The
takeaway.
very, very, very first thing. And you probably just saved yourself $3-4 a foot, just like that,
Just like that.
by understanding that. And here's the problem. Most
Changing
people
one
don't.
date.
Changing one date, changing one line in a lease. And that's why proposals are 4 pages and leases are 40.
Right.
It's all knowing what they do and how they do it.
Well, I think I got a good story. Well, at least I think it's a good story that we can end on. But before that, what about larceny? The bourbon, not the play on words and thievery, but the taste.
Oh, I like it.
And
Like
I
you liked
mean,
it before today, or you like it?
Yeah, I liked it before today. And larceny is distilled by Heaven Hill. And
Look at
Heaven
you,
Hill.
Is that
Smarty
what
pants.
his highlighted notes are over their bourbon tasting
No,
notes?
this is actually
We thought
a
he
lease.
came
This is
prepared
true.
with
It's a
Yeah.
lease. It's
I'm
not
joking.
bourbon.
Yeah, Heaven Hill. My wife's
How the heck do you know that it's Heaven Hill?
because I've been to Heaven Hill, and it's an Evan Williams product, and my wife's uncle Clifford was the CFO.
Whoa.
Okay.
Then
Then
Uncle
why did we
Clifford.
pay?
Pardon?
Why did we pay for this?
Well, he's been dead any number of years right now. So.
Oh,
Wait,
But,
minor details.
But
Yeah.
I mean, at $29 a bottle, it's almost like larceny.
Ah, that's pretty funny.
It wasn't
Yeah.
good.
And if you're ever
But
in
yeah,
Louisville, they have a
budget bourbon?
great
I-
museum.
What's it? Well, I don't.
We
even
were just
wanna ask
talking
what's in
about
it,
that.
but it's not my cup of tea, but
Well, I think
I knew that headed
we've
it.
established
But I
that.
still
do
don't
we
know
just
why.
I
think,
like
do we
cheap-
think Kevin even likes bourbon?
No, I like cheap bourbons, and
I mean,
So,
I think this is
My
like a
go-to
great
bourbon is
everyday
the
bourbon.
cheapest bourbon you can buy.
no, I think it's good. I like it.
But we do need. I was talking to Kevin today. We need to find
A sponsor.
a bourbon. Well, I wasn't even thinking of a sponsor. I was thinking of like a supplier.
oh, somebody
like a
with
guy.
like a
We
bourbon,
need a guy.
a guy who could like tell us about the bourbons.
Or a lady.
Yeah.
Well, I
No, that can get us the good bourbons.
Right.
Because we can't stand at the liquor store at 9 a.m. waiting for the truck to come to deliver like the 4 bottles of really sought after bourbon. So maybe Totum should go on the road.
That's what I was
Maybe
going to
we
say.
should take the.
We should take the
wanna go to Louisville?
podcast on the road.
On
We
the
should go
road.
to Louisville because
Let's do it.
if you really want to find a lot of bourbons,
They're in
that
Louisville.
would be the place to look.
I love it.
All right, so the story.
Totum does the bourbon. trail.
Totum does
telling.
the bourbon trail. And we are willing to take the podcast on the road. So if you want to host us and be a guest. We'll come to
A
your
gue-
location, and we would love to talk anything real estate.
Or if you
That's
have
on your mind.
suggestions too for ideas,
Yeah, things you want to hear about.
yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. Love the comments.
But so the story, which is great, back to larceny and landlord.
Oh.
So over the last few months, we have come to meet somebody through our travels in this crazy real estate world that we're in. He started a business when he was 19 years old, and that business was off to a very good start. And this was 55 years ago, by the way. And out of nowhere, he finds out that his landlord has decided to lease his space to somebody else because he didn't have a lease. And the light bulb went off with this young gentleman at the time that the landlord controls the keys. And he decided on that day that he was going to start buying real estate. So he bought a duplex. And fast forward 55 years later, he owns property in 19 different states in some 60 different cities, all because he realized that the landlord, who makes the rules, back to our whole conversation about operating expense pass-throughs, is the guy or gal who ends up with the keys to the castle. So pretty fitting end to the larceny discussion. So I think he's probably the one in the larceny bucket now, but it's an awesome story. That's why I love real
Yeah.
estate. So
Absolutely.
All right. Well, cheers.
cheers.
So, for Uncle Clifford.
Uncle Clifford.
There we go.
There we go.
All right.
We'll see you next time.